Hey everybody, welcome back to my ranking and top list series where today we will be going over monsters that have faced King Kong. Now this list is completely opinion based, and because that's the case, that means I want to see all of your lists down below. I won't be going over every single King Kong monster, as Kong has quite a load of villains within his library of monsters, so instead I'll be going over some of my favorites, gradually building up until we reach my favorite King Kong monster yet. And in case you're wondering, no, Godzilla is not going to be on this list, as he's his own monster if anything, and he would obviously take spot number 1. So this list only pertains to monsters that have appeared in King Kong media that are unique to King Kong himself. With that said, kick back, relax, and enjoy the video. Number 28, Giant Worms from Kong Gods of Skull Island. So kicking off this list, we're going to start off with monsters from a comic called Kong Gods of Skull Island. And these monsters are the Giant Worms. Now, they don't appear too often in this comic, but they're basically just giant worm monsters. They're really big, though, especially in comparison to Kong's parents, who look to be around 40 to 60 feet tall. There were giant worms all around these caves, and so when they came out and took baby Kong, Kong's parents go into the caves and fight these worms to death. They battle it out with the Queen Worms, who is a giant, and they successfully kill it. So, this is a pretty cool monster to me, and I think the design is quite unique, as we never really get this kind of monster within the typical King Kong stories. And also, this is kind of weird, but the face of the Queen Worm kind of reminds me a lot of the giant crab from the King Kong Nintendo DS games. I mean, look at them, they're practically siblings. This isn't the greatest monster in the world, but it is really unique, and it's kind of cool seeing these two smaller Kongs in comparison to this giant worm battle it out with said worm, who's a freaking behemoth of a monster. So, at number 28, yes, we have the Giant Worms. Number 27, the Graveyard Dinosaur, also from Kong Gods of Skull Island. So, yes, also appearing in this comic is a dinosaur that appears within a graveyard littered with Kong and other dinosaur bones. It was actually really cool seeing that this comic, which came out in, I believe, 2016, but maybe 2017, also featured a graveyard filled with Kong skeletons. I think the graveyard is a very nice addition to the King Kong mythos that this comic and Kong Skull Island 2017 helped introduce. But what's really cool is that this monster has a really suspenseful build-up to it. You know, we pan in on this thick fog and we see these creatures called harpies begin to chant. We'll get into these creatures later, trust me, but out of this thick fog comes this devilish-looking dinosaur that is an absolute badass in appearance. Now, we've had a lot of Tyrannosaurs in King Kong stories before, as you all know, but this one is a lot more devil-looking. It has this red and black color scheme, like the Carnotaurus in Fallen Kingdom and the Ceratosaurus in Jurassic Park 3. So, yeah, it's a really cool design. The only reason that it ranks so low on my list is because it only appears for a few panels, and it gets fucking murked by Kong. Dude, Kong rips off the upper half of this thing's skull with one arm. Now look, I'm fine with such a gnarly execution and all, but it would have been nice having an actual challenge rather than Kong dealing with this cool dinosaur as if it were just a pest. Now, I caught a ton of flack for saying this in my other videos regarding Godzilla, but that doesn't just apply to Godzilla, it applies to any character that I enjoy greatly. When you have a really cool monster like this Graveyard Dinosaur, for example, it would be really nice seeing, you know, Kong and this dinosaur go back and forth in a captivating way, as opposed to one character just wiping the other instantly. I think that builds better fights that are more entertaining, so for such a great design, I'd hate to see it get wasted, you know, having very little time to shine. Keep the execution, just make the main battle longer. And also a quick side note, throughout this comic, Kong has a terrible design. I'm just gonna say that right now. Because the body's fine, you know, it could be a bit slimmer towards the waist. I'm not a fan of the head design, though, at all. Kong's having furry eyebrows, like me. It just looks really off-putting, and his hairline is so defined, it kind of throws me off as well, and I don't know, I just think this Kong, his head is so weird, his head shape is so weird, it juts out from his shoulders, and it ends in this point, it looks like the shape of an almond. Again, like me! Now I get they're trying to border the line between ape and human, but this is taking it to a whole new level. I don't know, I've never been a fan of the Neanderthal or Sasquatch looking Kong designs. I like all the ones we've seen in live action so far, and think that the Monsterverse, for example, really nailed the design. But yeah, that was just a quick side comment. At number 26, also from Kong Gods of Skull Island, we have the giant insect monster. So this comic also has a really cool monster that is a gigantic centipede looking thing. It appears briefly, but it has a very grotesque looking design. It's very reminiscent of the millipedes we see in the 2005 King Kong game. I thought this was a pretty unique looking monster. It's not as big as Kong is, and for this list, I really want to focus on monsters that tangle with Kong as opposed to just like jungle life or creatures slightly larger than humans, but I think this creature was too cool not to include. At number 25, we have the Magician Monsters, again from Kong Gods of Skull Island. So, these are some of the most unique King Kong monsters I have ever seen. You guys are probably like, what the hell, Magician Monsters? Like, this comic started to delve into the world of magic and wizards, which honestly was kind of the point where this comic lost me, save for the Kong design. These are still some really cool looking monsters. I mean, story goes that this wizard travels to Skull Island in order to conquer King Kong. Using his evil magic, he creates basically a ton of hellspawn, you know, monsters of wings, fire, stone, steel, anything you can really think of. And what's crazy is that Kong straight up dismantles all of them like nothing. The magician's angered by this, so what he does is he brings to life Kong's ancestors by giving their bones life in the graveyard. As they begin to attack Kong, Kong has to defeat all of them too, which he of course does, because this Kong is fucking OP like crazy, you know? I mean, it's really surprising as to how strong he is in this story. Now, these are all some extraordinary monsters and all, but much like my issue with the Graveyard Dinosaur, they appear very briefly, for 2 panels to be precise. It would have been nice seeing Kong genuinely struggle and overcome these opponents, but man, Kong just wipes all of them out with 0 effort. A lot of these guys have really cool designs. I really dig the fire monster. It reminds me a lot of Obsidious from Godzilla Unleashed. And yeah, we don't really see Kong fight monsters like that, you know, with heat powers. So that was nice. The flying monsters look very cool as well. Seeing Kong fight his ancestors' skeletons is really tragic. A little over the top, but hey, if you're gonna start using the magic route, then fuck it, I guess, you know, go all out. This might sound a bit weird, but seeing those bones fighting Kong made me think of the artwork in Joe DeVito's Kong story. All in all, Magician Monsters. Pretty damn cool in appearance and design, I just wish we saw more of them, hence why they rank so low. Number 24, Death Runners and the Two-Headed Gaw from Boom Comics. Stepping away from the Kong Gods of Skull Island comic for a minute, we'll now be discussing the Death Runners from the Kong of Skull Island comic series by Boom Studios. I just want to clarify that if there is some jungle life, like small dinosaurs, I don't want to place them into separate categories. I'd much rather just bunch them all up into one unless they really stick out, and that's why most of the Boom Studios dinosaurs come into this category. I'm not too big of a fan of this comic, but they really do nail it with their dinosaur designs. It's kind of that perfect mix of realistic and retro. The dinosaurs are scaly and sharp looking, and it's super fitting for the kind of threat Skull Island poses throughout this series. There are some sharp and gnarly looking dinosaur designs here. I love the uses of fur being implemented on these guys, and it seems like that would be the artist's way of making these otherwise retro dinosaurs much more revamped and sort of realistic for modern audiences. In addition to these amazing dinosaur designs, we also get a big bad for Kong to face in this series. This would be the two-headed giant god of the Death Runners, famously known as the Gaw. Now, Gaw is a pretty cool monster for Kong to face, and I think it having 2 heads might be a bit too weird. They explain it away as twins being interconnected at birth, and that it's definitely a rarity within the animal kingdom, but it's still an animal. Perceived as a god by the Death Runners and creatures of the island, they have faith that Kongs can defeat it. Now, this thing is an absolute beast, and it's very unique. I think ultimately there are much cooler monsters within the King Kong mythos, but Gaw and the Death Runners land here because they're still pretty cool. Number 23, the Mosasaur-esque creature from Boom Comics. So I just want to start off by saying that if there is one thing I am absolutely terrified of, it's the ocean. Being in such deep, dark waters with what seems like infinite space, just anticipating that sudden jolt where a giant monster attacks you has been a fear that I have always had. You know, I used to watch that Sea Monsters of Walking with Dinosaurs documentary series as a kid, and that just made my fear like 10 times worse. You know, I was always both kind of petrified and fascinated by deep sea creatures, especially giants like the Mosasaurus, Megalodons, Plesiosaurs, Liopleurodons, and Predator X. I don't deny that I have thalassophobia, which is, if you don't know, just fear of like the unknown, like being underwater, but I think this would aid in making a place like Skull Island all the more scarier. I have always loved the idea of Skull Island having these giant kinds of monsters scouring within the depths of the ocean. It makes the waters as deadly as the land, if not more deadly, since once you're submerged, you're basically just food at that point, waiting to be chomped on. I'm not sure if this was intended to be a Mosasaurus, but Kong of Skull Island has an incredible looking giant mosasaur that attacks the boats when they arrive on the island, and what makes this such a terrifying monster is its size. This thing is able to swallow a Kong whole, and these Kongs are already like 40 to 60 feet in height, so imagine how much larger this Mosasaurus is. Actually, I think this Mosasaurus swallows both Kong and 2 other gigantic theropod dinosaurs, so that is just out of this world. I think this thing is most likely larger than the Jurassic World Mosasaurus. Much like with the dinosaurs of the island, this Mosasaurus is also very retro in design. It looks like something you'd see out of like a 60s dinosaur magazine. Those old school retro, inaccurate prehistoric creature designs have always had a lot of charm. You know, I love seeing that implemented in a Kong series because, you know, Skull Island is known for being the land lost to time itself. So I think this is absolutely a terrifying monster, and it's great to see it make a cool appearance. At number 22, we have the Pteranodons, also from the Boom Comics. Now, Boom Studios' Kong of Skull Island series has some amazing Pteranodon designs. First of all, I don't even know if I should call these things Pteranodons or Quetzalcoatlus. I have no idea how to pronounce it. There are also these basically Kong-sized monsters. I'll stick with Pteranodons for now, but man, these fuckers are huge! And that is part of their charm to me. Having monsters as big and bigger than Kongs, taking them head on and seeing Kongs overcome them. I think that's really cool. I actually think that's just part of the appeal of Kong and monsters on Skull Island. You know, these Pteranodons are just absolute giants. It makes them absolutely horrifying, and I think that they completely fit the tone of the island and of these comics. I would love to see a Pteranodon kaiju in future MonsterVerse movies because these totally work as Kong villains. They feel very real, yet unbelievable. It's insane. Going from the pretty cool monsters to the awesome monsters, we have at number 21, the Plesiosaur from Kong the Animated Series, specifically Season 2, Episode 19. So now we'll start leaning towards other Kong media, but one monster that is really cool is the Plesiosaur we see in Kong the Animated Series. We touched on how awesome it is seeing Kong battle it out with monsters underwater, and Godzilla vs. Kong really took it up a notch in showing us this. But we even got a really cool underwater fight in Kong the Animated Series. At this point in the show, they were messing with time travel plots, and so the scene takes place during the Great Cataclysm on Atlantis, which I guess is also Kong Island? I don't know, go with it. Now the stakes are high, the monster Kairos is about to be freed, and as Kong and gang are swimming through a river, all of a sudden a massive Kong-sized Plesiosaur appears. Kong fucking bops this thing instantly. It really caught me off guard when I was rewatching the episode. I was like, damn! I love that as Kong battles with this Plesiosaur, Jason and Tan fall into the waters below. It's really scary because you don't know what else could be down there. Kong Island, the thing about the animated series is it's geared towards kids. So Kong Island isn't as dangerous as your typical Skull Island, so I think this kind of lends more towards the fun factor of being underneath the depths. It isn't too deep of a river or anything, so there's room for some nice cinematography and cool bright visuals, even when you're under the ocean. And I think they really nailed that summer vibe you get from watching this show. Anyway, Kong and the Plesiosaur have a very cool fight. It's small, but it isn't meant to be like the big highlight of the episode or anything. It's just a quick encounter with the Plesiosaur, and we see Kong and the Plesiosaur kind of grapple underneath the surface of the water, and they both toss each other around. It's very fun, and it's kind of a refreshing fight. And the Plesiosaur has a very cool looking design, so that is why, at number 21, ranks the Plesiosaur. At number 20, we have the Cyber Polar Bear from Kong the Animated Series, Season 2, Episode 2. For those who have not watched the show, you might be thinking, what the hell is a cyber polar bear? Well, this show had a gimmick where humans could merge with monsters or animals and form entirely new anthropomorphic beings with a device called a cyberlink. This is during the early 2000s, so you'll hear a lot of talk like cyber and digital and web and internet being thrown around. Now the cyberlink, this can be a make it or break it deal for many people just entering this show. I for one grew up on this series, so it doesn't bother me as much, but I can totally understand why it might for others. I still love the characters and Kong himself in the show, and I think he can be very goofy at times, but it's all part of the fun. In Season 2, Episode 2, titled Blue Star, we get an Arctic-themed episode where the gang encounters an illegal arms dealer and poacher by the name of Andre the Terrorist. The plot of this episode is much more intricate and detailed. I'm just kind of giving you guys the Cliff Notes version. But long story short, Andre gets his hands on a cyberlink and merges with a polar bear, forming a monster by the name of the Cyber Bear. I called it a cyber polar bear because earlier in the series we get what is essentially a legitimate cyber bear, but we'll touch on that later. Kong battles it out with this behemoth of a monster, and I think this monster has a very awesome design. It looks a lot like the Wolfman from the Lost Godzilla movie, and the red glowing eyes it has contrasts perfectly with its fur white coat. Kong and this giant polar bear duke it out in the freezing waters of the Arctic, and it's a pretty entertaining fight, I have to admit. Overall, I think it's a rad design for a monster. Again, I love the more anthropomorphic and humanoid monsters that Kong faces throughout the series, and that's where I think overall this TV show really shines. At number 19, we have the Cyber Rat from Season 1, Episode 5 of Kong the Animated Series. Now, the Cyber Rat is a monster that appears in Season 1, Episode 5, titled The Giant Claw Robberies. A series of robberies has occurred in New York regarding ancient tablets related to the Primal Stones. As our gang encounters Ramon de la Porta and his goons, they use their cyberlink to merge with a cat and a rat. Now, the cat monster is cool, I guess. I don't really care about that monster as much. But what steals it for me is the rat monster. This thing is awesome. I love how it's very humanoid looking, of course, but it also has a very distinguishable feature of a rat. So it's got a long rat tail, it's got missing patches of fur on his arms. Okay, that might not be a trait we see with rats, but it still looks cool. Kong manhandles both of these monsters in the 2v1, which is very cool. But that rat monster always sticks out to me as being so incredibly distinct in appearance. At number 18, we have the Death Jackals. So, at number 18, yes, we have the Death Jackals from the Monsterverse. I think these were some awesome creatures, and they felt very much like a way of honoring the dinosaurs we have seen in King Kong media prior. While also being realistic and surprisingly mammalian in appearance, these guys look a lot like the Death Runners, and of course in their names as well. You have Death Jackals, Death Runners. But I think these are just really amazing monsters. I would love to see more of them in films as opposed to only the comics, but I really like the idea of Kong fighting a Death Jackal Titan. I mean, imagine maybe they originate in the Hollow Earth where they get bigger and are Titan-sized. Maybe there's an alpha Death Jackals that can face Kong, Who knows? That would be really cool. Again, I love the use of fur on these guys, much like with the Death Runners, and I think that they can be filmed in a terrifying way if they do make an appearance on film. At number 17, we have Gorosaurus. Taking a quick break from the animated series, we have Gorosaurus. You guys are probably wondering, why the hell does Gorosaurus rank so low on this list? Honestly, I'm not too big on Gorosaurus. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think he's a great kaiju, and I think his fight with Kong is really nice and well done. Ultimately, though, I do think that there are just cooler monsters in Kong's Rogues Gallery that outshine Goro. And again, I'm not shitting on Gorosaurus or anything, I'm just not too big on him. I do like his spike-tipped tail. I'm not sure if that appeared in Destroy All Monsters or King Kong Escapes, but I think it might be Destroy All Monsters. But yeah, I think a Gorosaurus redesign can totally work in the Monsterverse, and I think that design can use a lot more inspiration to make him more of a badass as a dinosaur monster. But yeah, at number 17 is Gorosaurus. At number 16, we have the Bad Cat from Kong the Animated Series. This is Season 1, Episode 1. So, yes, touching back on the animated series, we essentially have Ramon de la Porta in the first episode of the series, on the ropes, about to be killed by Chondar, who is Lua's close friend and benevolent protector. Ramon just stole a cyberlink from Dr. Jenkins, and as he's about to be killed, he merges with Chondar, forming this giant saber-toothed cat monster. This is a really cool monster, and I think it serves as a great way of introducing fans to this new take on Kong and what types of monsters that we would expect from the series. I love the mane that this thing has. It's an utter badass in appearance. Upon first encounter, this thing just kind of tosses Kong aside like a toy. And I'll admit, I do think the short tail is a little awkward looking compared to the rest of its body, and that the fight is a little bit on the short side. But as a monster, I have to say, they really put in a lot of effort with this guy. I would have loved to have seen it return and put those giant teeth to good use. I really just dig this design, and I think this is a cool monster. At number 15, we have the giant millipedes from Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Wow, that was a mouthful. Now, the giant millipedes appear in the King Kong game for consoles back in 2005, We all remember how annoying they were, but one thing that many of us may not remember is that in the PSP version of the game, these millipedes are King Kong sized. You battle it out in the lair with them. I fucking love the idea of these giant millipedes existing in the 2005 universe. They're already awesome as it is, but the idea of them being able to tangle with Kong makes them 10 times more unique as creatures. Now, I take it as canon that these exist on Skull Island in Peter Jackson's version, and that King Kong frequently tangles with up to 3 of them at a time, like we see in the game. These creatures have such a grotesque and unsettling design, and it's pretty impressive as to what the game developers were able to accomplish in the early 2000s. They make really gross sounds when they crawl, and you can hear them coming from like a mile away, whether they're on the walls behind you or above you. Yeah, I think the game devs definitely know how to keep you on the edge of your seat as you venture through this island. You kind of always have to stay alert no matter where you are and who you are, be it Jack or Kong. Super cool monsters and an awesome addition to the mythos. At number 14, we have the Cyber Bear from Kong the Animated Series, Season 1, Episode 2. So, in the second episode of the series, Ramon de la Porta merges with a giant bear or sloth. I'm 90% positive it's just a Skull Island bear. But yeah, we get to see this once again humanoid anthropomorphic bear Kong has to face. I like this monster a lot because it can be seen as a homage to the second King Kong movie, Son of Kong, where Kiko, Kong's son, fights a Skull Island bear monster. So coincidentally, this is Season 1, Episode 2, and Kong is fighting a giant bear here like his son did in 1933, which was the second King Kong movie. So it's kind of a nice parallel to the overarching franchise. Yeah, I really dig the design of this monster. Much like with the Cyber Polar Bear, the red eyes contrast nicely with the brown hair that this monster has. The claws provide a threat to Kong, which he should try to avoid, and as Jason merges with Kong, we get a short yet sweet battle between these two Goliaths. Now, the bear doesn't do as much as I would have liked to have seen him do. I would have loved to have seen him claw at Kong and bite Kong, much like an actual bear. But this thing does literally give Kong a bear hug. How crazy is that? Kong also takes this thing out by karate chopping it, or karate palming it, I guess you can say. The bear ends up dropping the Cyberlink, and this leaves Ramon de la Porta to revert back to his human form. Overall, an incredibly unique monster design. I would have loved to have seen it utilized more within the series. If we do get a giant Memily and bear kaiju in the Monsterverse, I really hope that they draw inspiration from this design. And wrapping up this section, we have at number 13, the Venus Flytrap monster from Kong the Animated Series, Season 2, Episode 9. So in this episode, titled Green Fear, Kong battles it out with basically the Walmart version of Biollante. I've always wanted to see Kong battle it out with a monster like Biollante, and while this monster isn't as cool regarding the alligator-shaped head and the tentacles that Biollante has, or the acid attack, this monster has the head of a Venus flytrap, and some very thick tentacles that entrap Kong. Kong has some trouble with this monster, and he gets help from Jason to succeed in defeating it. But yeah, I mean, this is an amazing monster. I think with a redesign, I can totally see it working in the Monsterverse. I mean, maybe if Godzilla, fought Biollante, and then traces of Biollante DNA can be found within the Hollow Earth, it can merge with other Kaiju DNA, resulting in a Biollante-esque monster that Kong can fight. I don't know. I mean, that's a very, very rough idea I just came up with, but seeing Kong battle it out with a plant monster is very cool. And now we enter the section titled My Absolute Favorite Monsters of the King Kong Mythos. So, kicking it off at number 12, we have Mechanicong. So, I have a huge love for this monster. This was the first robotic doppelganger, predating Mechagodzilla by a good couple years. Almost an entire decade, I want to say. This is a really fun villain that I think has been underutilized in the past. I would have loved to have seen it return in some way, shape, or form within Kong media. Not the Monsterverse. I don't see that working, especially considering we just got Mechagodzilla. I think it would be pretty hokey to now have Mechanicong. But, yeah, Mechanicong is awesome. I'm not too big on Mechanicong or anything. He was a big part of my childhood, but I think ultimately, again, much like a lot of the monsters on this list, they kind of get outshined by even better monsters. So Mechanicong comes in at number 12. Quick side note, I think Bandai killed it with their figure, by the way, and that was a big part of my childhood. So, yes, Mechanicong. At number 11, we have the Kunai Predator from Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. So in the King Kong 2005 video game, we get an amazing monster known as the Kunai Predator, which I suck at pronouncing, of course. Many just know it as the giant crab monster, but this is a sick monster you honestly would never expect from Peter Jackson's King Kong universe. I love how ferocious it sounds when it roars, and I can imagine Kong battling it out with this thing. I don't imagine that he hasn't encountered this thing before. In the Nintendo DS game, it appears a little more often than you'd think. It shows up in deep caves towards like the shore of the island, and then it just shows up in the middle of the jungle, which is really weird, but it kind of adds to that eeriness of Skull Island, especially in that game, because you never know. Geez, if I turn this corner, would I encounter a giant fucking 12-foot crab? Like, I have no idea. It's just so cool. It's just such a unique monster that I have a huge attachment to, since I played the King Kong 2005 video game a lot as a kid. So, you know, I know that video game like the back of my hand, and this is definitely one of my favorite monsters. At number 10, we have the monkey talking creature things, aka the Harpies, from Kong Gods of Skull Island. So circling back to the Kong Gods of Skull Island comic, this comic has these creatures that look so much like monkeys with wings, and in this story they're called Harpies. These things are fucking scary. They kind of just ominously sit perched along the trees, and they just stalk people. I'm not too keen on like Mario games and stuff, but I think in Mario Galaxy, when you look up towards the cliffs, you just see these people just watching you, and it's very eerie, it's incredibly scary, and I think that's kind of like what these creatures are in this Gods of Skull Island comic. And much like parrots, it seems like they can just replicate sounds that they hear. Either that, or they just straight up know how to talk. But in the graveyard, they're shown chanting Kong's name, and they are fucking terrifying, man. They add to that feeling that you're being watched, and that's a very scary feeling to have. Much like how in the 2005 King Kong game, it kind of looks like you're being watched by the natives. Like if you just glance over at like the top of a building or a stone structure, you'll just see a native's head quickly disappear. That's the kind of scary feeling that I love Skull Island having, and I think having these creatures in the jungles just adds to that. You know, it just realistically makes it look like, oh, I'm being watched all the time. So I think that is very cool, and I would love to see these kinds of creatures in future movies and in King Kong media. At number 9, we have the Terrapus Mordax bats from Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Another amazing monster in the King Kong 2005 universe are these giant bats, known officially as the Terrapus Mordax bats. That's a very weird mouthful, but yeah, these are some frightening designs for creatures. I love the smaller ones that appear in the film because they are so scary looking. If you pause the film at the right time, you'll most likely see that these guys have these kind of vampiric white looking eyes that just invokes such an eerie feeling. It's very hard to shake off. In the game, they're often seen perched far away, often being seen only through their silhouettes. Again, it's that scary feeling Skull Island has in the Peter Jackson universe where it always feels like you're being watched. And I fucking love that feeling. As scary as it is, it's also kind of like thrilling because you're always on edge. I mean, you won't know what's around every corner, and the bats just kind of scream that feeling. Now, in the 2005 universe, there were also King Kong-sized Terrapus Mordax bats, and I'm just gonna call them giant bats. These giant bats serve as bosses that Kong can fight, and he takes on 2 at a time at one point in the game, also taking on about 4 V-Rexes within like 10 to 20 minutes, 1 in the beginning and then 3 by the end of the level. I love that these giant bat monsters are so big because it just makes them that much more menacing. You know, they're capable of tangling with Kong, and that is fascinating to think about. It's pretty crazy what didn't make it in the actual film, but can still be considered canon, at least in my eyes. So this is an amazing monster, and one of my favorites, again, in the King Kong mythos. At number 8, we have the Skull Crawlers. Now we're kind of approaching the end of the list with the Skull Crawlers. At first I was a bit underwhelmed with these designs. You know, I thought they looked amazing, of course, but I was expecting Kong to take on like 3 or 4 of them because of how frail they look. But Kong ends up only fighting one large one at the end of the film, which is a bit disappointing to me. It did feel like a step down from King Kong 2005, where Kong just handles 3 V-Rexes at once. And in the Monsterverse, Kong's dad takes on 4 to 5 of these guys before going down. Now, it would have been nice to have seen Kong take at least 3 100-foot ones head on, but regardless of that, you know, in terms of designs, these are some of the best monsters we have gotten in Kong media before. It definitely fits the tone of a terrifying Skull Island, but I don't think Monster vs. Skull Island is as horrifying as the other Skull Islands we've covered. But these creatures do make up for some of that issue, and yeah, I like the idea that these things are kind of pack hunters, and they still have the strength to chuck opponents larger than themselves, while also being deadly the larger they get. They're basically kind of like the Monsterverse's version of Gaiaos and Mutos in that they repopulate rapidly and could proliferate out of control, infesting the entire world if Kong were to disappear. I love their skull designs. I think it's really smart how their eyes have kind of the evolutionary advantage of being behind the white parts of their heads, tricking enemies into thinking that their eyes are in the white sections when they're actually in the dark sections. It's very realistic, and it's much like what we see with killer whales in real life. So yeah, I just love these monsters. I think they're really cool, and I hope to see Kong just demolish like 4 or 5 of them in future movies since he's in the Hollow Earth now. At number 7, we have the V-Rex. In King Kong 2005, we are introduced to the V-Rexes. These creatures are explained away as being evolved versions of Tyrannosaurs, and so why they are much larger and more powerful. This would also explain why they look more different, as Peter Jackson uses this as an excuse to make these creatures look a lot more retro in appearance, and much like what the original 1933 Meat Eater looked like. Since I grew up on King Kong 2005, these were definitely one of my favorite dinosaurs growing up, if not my outright favorite. I love just how absolutely amazing and visually spectacular the fight between Kong and the V-Rexes were. I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of like the behind the scenes stuff that went into this film, but if you look at, I think, the production diaries and like the features that the movie has, there is a lot of really insane work that went into the previs of this fight. And there are also adaptations of this fight in things like graphic novels and comics that take this fight to a whole other extreme. If you think the 2005 fight was dynamic, you have to watch the previs for this fight. It's even more dynamic. I think we would have seen a V-Rex fall from cliffs, get their arms ripped off by Kong, and surprisingly, we would have also seen them swim, very much like a snake. It's really weird, but it's really goddamn cool, you gotta admit that. The fight definitely goes through a lot of iterations, but ultimately what we got was, what we ended up with, and I'm very happy for that because that is still an incredible fight. Throughout other pieces of King Kong media regarding this universe, there are different colored V-Rexes, many that are blue and some that are even purple, which you see in the books. In some artwork, there were even V-Rexes with clubs at the end of their tails, and this even translated into the Playmates figures. Now, because Skull Island has such a wide ecosystem, I would consider this canon, as Skull Island is just so goddamn big, This would allow for certain adaptations like different colored skins, evolutionary adaptations like a club at the end of their tails. That's just an idea I kind of had regarding these different V-Rex types that we see throughout this film's universe's media. Overall, I have such a huge connection to these creatures that, while they're incredibly badass, also hold a very special place in my heart. So that is why at number 7 comes the V-Rexes. At number 6, we have the Pteranodon. So the Pteranodon is another monster that I grew hugely attached to, much like with the V-Rexes. This creature appeared in a deleted scene for King Kong 2005, and it is such a badass. It also appears in the King Kong books, as well as in the Playmates figures, where Kong straight up battles one. I think it would be safe to say that Kong has definitely encountered and battled these kinds of creatures in the 2005 universe before. I actually think it would have been really cool to see a scene like that play out on film. It does in the video games, but an underwater fight would have been amazing. I think this monster is just haunting, and I love it so goddamn much. At number 5, we have the Warbats. The Warbats are really cool monsters, and they're actually brand new to the King Kong mythos. Appearing in GVK 2021, these creatures battle Kong, who is very inexperienced with Titan battles, and they get him on the ropes due to his lack of experience. Now, these monsters are the best of both worlds for Kong creatures. They're flyers, but they're also snake-like and kind of serpentine when it comes to their bodies. So this poses 2 threats to Kong, and that is that they can fly, and they're also able to coil Kong up and constrict him to the point of suffocation. Now, I think that if Kong had more experience, he'd probably be able to find a way to get out of such a conundrum that we saw him in when it came to this scene. I mean, maybe he would be able to just use his fangs and teeth to chew through the wings, but yeah, I would love to see these monsters return and just show Kong battle like 3 or 4 of them at once to show he's experienced, I think they're absolute badasses at the end of the day and a very welcoming addition to the King Kong mythos. At number 4, we have Set, the ancient Egyptian god of evil, from Kong the Animated Series, Season 1, Episode 13, called The Sleeping City. At one point in the animated series, Kong goes up against a literal god. The god in question is an ancient Egyptian god by the name of Set. I wasn't expecting this monster to get so high on the list, but when I was rewatching every episode of the series, this monster just stuck out to me. I love giant humanoid werewolf-esque monsters, and one thing that fascinates me is ancient Egyptian mythology. One of my favorite movies ever is The Mummy 1999 with Brendan Fraser, and when watching this episode, I was getting nothing but those old school late 90s action-adventure Universal vibes. The same vibes we would have gotten if Peter Jackson had went about creating his original King Kong film back in 1996. Very quickly, for those who don't know, King Kong 2005 was originally going to come out much earlier, back in 1996, and it would have been exactly like The Mummy was in tone and comedy, and even pacing. And I think The Mummy is a solid film. I would give it a 10 out of 10 because I just love that movie so much. I love 2005 as well. It's my all-time favorite film. but man, I would have loved to have seen the 96 film. So this episode of the series has that feeling of a fun action adventure vibe that I feel like both The Mummy and King Kong 96 had, or would have had in Kong's case. Set is a badass monster. He's brought to life by Ramon de la Porta, who finds out through legends that if he achieves this goal, he will be granted eternal life. When he brings Set to life and asks him for his reward, Set turns him into stone, ironically granting him eternal life. Set's goals are to raise the ancient city buried within the sand, and when he does so completely, the ancient gods of Egypt will return to destroy the world. Set is a monster with a really cool design. I love how completely different it is from other Kong villains. I think the way that this guy sounds is also very scary. I don't think monsters should almost never be able to talk. But I like that when this one does, it sounds very raspy and kind of inhuman. And I think the fact that you never see his mouth move when he speaks is what adds to that fear. Him also being an ancient Egyptian god means that he would be speaking ancient Egyptian, which is something that nobody would be able to understand. So that gives his speaking trait more of a pass. One thing that's crazy about Set is that he has a staff that can turn living beings to stone, and that he could use to propel fireball attacks. Both of which are attacks that we see Kong take. Set can use his energy to literally raise a city buried deep beneath the sand, and his physical strength is crazy. He takes boulders like nothing, not even moving a centimeter when he's hit. He's able to grab Kong and just straight up toss him with absolutely zero effort, and his blows do the same thing. Set is an absolute powerhouse. Kong is only able to hurt him with his physical strength maybe a few times, and he would have had to fight incredibly smart in order to possibly win. But I think ultimately Set outmatches Kong in every possible way. Kong is only able to win with the weapon of Osiris. But what's just crazy to think about is that Kong proves he's able to hold this literal god off long enough before they can figure out a solution. He just takes some nasty blows from this monster. He takes a hit from a staff that turned a human into stone. He takes a massive fireball attack. He takes physical blows from a character who has the energy to lift a city from deep sand. So Set is one tough cookie, and he kind of makes Kong look good in that Kong is taking these blows and he's able to kind of hang 10 for a little bit with him. Set also has these two minions, and that kind of feeds more into the werewolf appeal that I was talking about earlier. And these creatures are tall. I mean, they look like they're 9 to maybe 13 feet tall. I love the werewolf designs. It's super fitting for the kind of environment they're in, and I think the ripped bandages really adds to that kind of Mummy 1999 feeling. I think Set is definitely one of my favorite monsters that King Kong has ever faced before. So far, Set looks very, very accurate to what the real Set in ancient Egyptian legend looks like. But I think that would have been cooler if you replaced his human-looking parts with werewolf-looking parts, like patches of fur and claws. Very much like the god Anubis. Those are some things I would do to the design to sort of revamp it. You know, they're just some small personal changes I would make. But I still think this monster is absolutely phenomenal. Just the breath of fresh air in the King Kong mythos, it's so different from everything else we've seen before. And I love the dynamic between Kong and Set. It's a matchup you would never expect, but when you get it, you love it. Or at least I did. But man, Set is incredible. One of my favorite monsters of all time. At number 3, we have Onimus. Onimus is a monster we have seen pop up time and time again within Kong the Animated Series. Now, Onimus serves as a close ally to an even worse monster, Kairos, who we'll get into in a sec. Onimus has always been a favorite of mine growing up. He looks very much like Kong, but he's also much different. I love how much bulkier he is compared to Kong, and how his legs seem to kind of reverse bend like we'd see on dogs or lions or even dinosaurs. He has a very, very cool color scheme that changes as the show goes on, but I personally think he looked the most badass in Ancient Time episodes, like when Kong Island was being defended by the original Kong and volcanoes were erupting all around. In Season 2, Onimus has a brown color scheme, while in Season 1 he has a more of green, red, blue color scheme. I don't know why, but I always found the brown color scheme more appealing. He takes on the brown color scheme when he's basically just possessed by Kairos, and when he isn't, then he takes on his more organic green color scheme. Now, Onimus is, like I said, a recurring villain in the show. He shows up many times, and he genuinely gives Kong some tough fights, especially in Ancient Times. Onimus is so strong, he's able to single-handedly hold Kong's arm behind his back and dangle him over a waterfall. I mean, this guy is no joke. He's said to be Kairos' most fierce warrior. He's also able to blend in and morph with the environment he's in, which is also very cool to see. Now, I've always thought Onimus was an utter badass. His design is awesome, and he's able to really put Kong through the ringer whenever the two cross paths. So, Onimus is an amazing monster, and I would love to see this guy return in future King Kong movies. At number 2, we have Kairos, the big bad of Kong the Animated Series. Kairos is such an incredibly unique monster. I really dig how serpentine he is, yet how humanoid his upper body is. He's kind of like a centaur in that regard. Kairos is fucking huge, man. He is already much larger than Kong, but when Kairos wants to tower over Kong, he absolutely can. I mean, Kairos is a beast, too. I mean, we see in Season 2, Episode 17, that he's able to create a tornado by just shouting. Once he's freed, he's able to cause tsunamis, a storm with lightning, tremors, and earthquakes. Just utter chaos, man. And earlier in the show, Kong defeats Kairos through becoming Mega Kong, which is a point where he gets so angry he doubles in size and power when he's merged with Jason. And man, Kairos fucking mops him when he's completely released in this episode. Kairos' size is kind of all over the place, but he's definitely over 100 feet tall. Look at how he carries Mega Kong in this episode. He's fucking huge! I think Kairos has a rad color scheme, being this kind of dark reddish orange with black magma covered sections looking as if it were volcanic rock. I think it's a great design. Him being serpentine is also a trait we see in many Kong opponents, which adds to his overall epicness. I love the idea of Kong having an opponent who's able to prey on his weaknesses regarding heat attacks. Much like with Godzilla, Kairos is able to spam his magma attacks as Kong dodges them. He's tangled with lava monsters before and he's sustained mild injuries and burns, but it's still best for him to avoid these heat attacks. Overall, I adore the dynamic between these two monsters, and Kairos, man, he's such a powerful monster. The only way he's really defeated is by being trapped within another dimension twice. The second time, Kong traps him through a stone portal, and then he outright breaks it. That's crazy. You know what else is crazy is the fact that the original Kong was able to defeat Kairos, who was then locked away in another dimension by the ancient shaman of Kong Island. So they really made OG Kong a powerhouse. Kairos is amazing as a Kong villain, and much like with Camazotz, I think Kairos can be a recurring Kong villain if he's done correctly in future stories. I may have spoiled it, but at number 1, my absolute favorite King Kong monster is Camazotz. Hell yeah, baby. At number 1, we got Camazotz. I have said this time and time again on this channel, but Camazotz is the absolute GOAT. This is such an incredible monster. I cannot begin to tell you guys how much I adore this design. The mythology department at Legendary, Marianello, who wrote, and Zid, who illustrated Kingdom Kong, all killed it with this monster. I really dig the idea of a vampiric monster who feeds off atomic kaiju blood. That's just so different from every villain we've ever gotten before. His motivations are just way more improved than a lot of these villains on the list. Vampires are badass too. If you guys have ever seen Lost Tapes, this old found footage TV show on Animal Planet, there's a vampire episode that is absolutely haunting, and that's what Camazotz reminds me of. Camazotz has such a jagged, sharp, rough-looking body, it totally lines up with the kind of creature that he is. A vampire-inspired monster is sick, and because vampires feed off blood, Camazotz being all gray and sharp kinda adds to that factor of him looking as if he's dried out. And Camazotz being so skeletal looking adds to that darkness he would bring upon the world if he ever succeeded in his goals of shrouding the world in permanent midnight. I really love how well written Camazotz is. I had some ideas regarding Camazotz's potential abilities before this comic came out. I'll link that video in the description because I think that would have made this monster go from like a 10 to a 20. But man, Camazotz's design and his abilities are so goddamn creative. Much like with Kairos and Set and Onimus, it felt like a breath of fresh air in this otherwise stagnant franchise, as much as I hate to admit it. We're experiencing history right now. Kong is moving past his roots, even despite his mess of a right situation, as I've talked about on this channel many a time. But I think Camazotz is a big factor in moving Kong past his roots. He provides a tough challenge to Kong, and he's basically forcing Kong into this world of titans and dominance. And I love Camazotz's gray skin and his brown mane. It contrasts very well with Kong's brown fur in their fight. In addition to the storm he pulls in, which by the way is filled with vibrant purples and grays, you get to see how much of a nice color palette the final battle has. It's the fact that Camazotz is still alive. I mean, that means we can see him return on screen and we can see the two rematch. That would be amazing because you can do some crazy things with Camazotz regarding the horror aspect of this character. He's the physical embodiment of darkness, essentially, so you can totally play on that when you're adapting him to screen. I think Camazotz is a badass monster, and he's definitely one of the stars of this incredible King Kong story that I highly recommend you all check out whenever you have the time, because you absolutely will not regret it. I also had the honor of recently interviewing Marianello, who is the writer of this story. She was very nice, very welcoming, and totally understanding, because that was my first interview and I was super nervous. If you couldn't tell by my overuse of the word incredible. But yeah, you know, just feel free to check that video out. I'll link it towards the end of this one. But Camazotz is an amazing monster. I think he just outright needs to return to the film. Have Marie write this new story, have Zid there to create concept art and provide visual art direction to the VFX artists, and you have an amazing King Kong film. And that wraps up this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know what are your favorite King Kong monsters down below. I read every single comment, and I just want you all to know how much I appreciate you taking the time out of your days to watch this video. You are all the best. Much love for each and every one of you, and I will catch you all in the next one. This is King Kong 9100, signing out. Until next time, bye-bye.